The United States has laid out the conditions it expects Canada to meet during the review of their key free trade deal. Conditions the U.S. Trade Representative says must be met in order to keep CUSMA for the long term.
The U.S. to lift those punishing tariffs on key sectors like steel, aluminum, lumber, autos.
Alcohol, dairy, and energy, all three made the list of demands from the U.S. if it is to remain in the three-way trade agreement with Canada and Mexico known as CUSMA.
Power politics rarely show themselves this clearly. 5 demands arrive from Washington, each one aimed straight at Canada's economy, culture, and sovereignty. Most leaders would have tried to soften the edges or quietly compromise behind closed doors. Mark Carney did something else entirely. He rejected all 5 publicly and without hesitation. That single decision set off a chain reaction across North America, exposing how deeply the United States depends on Canada and how prepared Ottawa had become for this moment. What followed was not a shouting match. It became a strategic standoff with global consequences. Trump placed 5 demands on the table as conditions for extending North America's most important trade agreement: dairy access, digital media laws, provincial alcohol restrictions, government procurement rules, energy policy. Each demand targeted a specific pillar of Canada's economy, and together they formed a blueprint for reshaping the entire trading relationship between the two countries. Mark Carney reviewed the list and rejected every single item. That response was not emotional, and it was not impulsive. It was calculated, because behind each demand sat a quiet admission about what Washington needed most. United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer laid everything out before Congress. No leaks, no speculation. The message was direct. Canada must comply if it wants the agreement extended another 16 years. The first demand centered on dairy. American producers want broader access to Canada's tightly controlled dairy market. Under the current system, U.S. farmers can export limited volumes tariff-free. Anything above that threshold faces tariffs ranging from 200 to 298%. Greer described Canada's supply management system as unfair and claimed it blocks American farmers from competing on equal footing. Carney responded the following day. Supply management was not up for discussion. He delivered that answer in French, signaling directly to Quebec, where dairy farming supports thousands of families and where the system carries enormous political weight. Canada reinforced that position weeks earlier by passing legislation that permanently protects supply management. This was not a temporary promise. It became law. Even if Ottawa wanted to bend, it no longer could. Washington could demand changes, but the door was legally closed. The second demand targeted digital media. Canada's Online Streaming Act requires platforms like Netflix, Spotify, and YouTube to invest a share of their Canadian revenue into local content. The Online News Act forces large platforms to compensate Canadian publishers when they link or republish news stories. Greer argued that both laws discriminate against American tech companies and create barriers for U.S. digital service providers. Canada's position remained firm. These laws exist to protect Canadian culture, journalism, and creative industries. Without them, American platforms would dominate the market entirely, leaving local voices buried beneath global algorithms. Carney made it clear that cultural sovereignty was not a bargaining chip, and dismantling these protections would hand control of Canada's media landscape directly to Silicon Valley. That trade-off was never going to happen. The third demand focused on alcohol. Several Canadian provinces, including Ontario and British Columbia, banned American beer and wine in response to Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods. Greer demanded those bans be lifted as part of the trade extension. What Washington overlooked was the sequence of events. The bans came after the tariffs. Remove the tariffs and the provincial bans disappear. Greer instead asked Canada to lift its retaliation while U.S. tariffs remained in place. That proposal required Canada to accept economic punishment without defending itself. Carney refused. The bans would stay until the tariffs came down. The fourth demand involved government procurement. Greer accused Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia of favoring Canadian suppliers over American companies for public contracts. He called these practices discriminatory and demanded changes. The argument rang hollow. The United States enforces Buy American policies across federal agencies and military contracts. Domestic preference rules apply to everything from steel to software. Washington was asking Canada to abandon policies that America uses every day. Carney treated the request as what it was: hypocrisy presented as negotiation. The fifth demand centered on energy. Greer raised concerns about Alberta's electricity grid, claiming it favored in-province generation over imports from Montana during certain periods. Alberta's utilities minister rejected the allegation outright and stated there was no differential treatment. But the larger energy reality ran in the opposite direction. The United States imports roughly 3.8 million barrels of Canadian crude oil every day. About 23% of American refinery feedstock comes from Canada. Gulf Coast refineries were designed specifically to process Canadian heavy sour crude. During winter peaks, New England relies on Canadian electricity to keep homes heated and lights on. Energy does not flow in one direction. Canada supplies a massive share of what keeps America running. This is where most commentary misses the point. Many assume that rejecting 5 demands weakens Canada's position or invites retaliation. But Carney was not issuing blind refusals. He was holding leverage. Each demand revealed pressure points inside the American economy. Dairy access showed that U.S. farmers need Canadian consumers. Digital media complaints showed that American tech firms are losing billions due to Canada's local investment rules. Procurement demands showed that Canadian governments are successfully keeping money at home. Every item on Greer's list highlighted a Canadian policy that works. Instead of weakening Canada, the demands exposed its strengths. And one sector remained conspicuously absent from the list: automobiles. That silence said everything. North America's auto industry operates as a single integrated system. Parts cross the border multiple times before a vehicle reaches the showroom floor. Canadian factories produce components for American trucks. U.S. plants manufacture engines for Canadian sedans. The entire supply chain depends on seamless movement between countries. Automakers told Congress that the trade agreement saves tens of billions of dollars each year through regional integration. Mark Roos, president of General Motors, explained that supply chains span all 3 countries and that the complexity is enormous. Trump imposed Section 232 tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos anyway, disrupting the very network American manufacturers rely on. Now, those same manufacturers are urging Washington to preserve the agreement. Without it, tariffs become permanent, and integrated production begins to fracture. Carney understands this.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and help the channel grow. I'll keep you updated.